I have a few considerations that I would like to make about this topic, but first let's see what happened. So let's go chronologically. On the 25th of March, Linux developer Danilo Kramrich sent a series of patches to the mailing list titled DRM Rust Abstractions. As he mentions in the email, the series have been worked initially by Asahi Lina, who has since then stepped down. She also sent a private email to him saying, feel free to take anything that's useful and use it or submit it in any way, and also hinted to the fact that she was fed up with kernel development and didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. Danilo credits Lena as co-author in all of the patches, even as primary author in one, and asks her whether she's fine being a co-author instead of the primary author, which Danilo said himself to be. This last sentence is particularly important. Let me quote it verbatim. If you, however, feel uncomfortable with any of the co-developed by tags due to major changes, please let me know. Given the context, it seems somewhat clear that this refers to Lena being co-author instead of primary author and an offer to swap the two around. However, Lena instead interpreted this to mean that if she was uncomfortable with being set as co-author, Danilo was willing to remove her as co-author, thus not crediting her at all. And this immediately frustrated her, since she perceived that Danilo was open to demoting her to 0 credit instead of promoting her to primary author. I'm still somewhat surprised that she jumped at this conclusion, but we'll get to that later. As a result, she asks Danilo why she was not set as primary author and specifically says, I'm really tired of kernel politics and I don't want to spend more brain cycles looking at all the other patches or having to argue. In fact, I usually don't look at patch emails at all recently. But I would appreciate if you kept my authorship for files that I did largely author myself. After everything that I've been going through the past few weeks, some of the people on CC know what this is about. This feels like yet another slap in the face. Again, Danilo already offered to change the primary author, but Lena did not catch that at this time and already used some strong wording like slap in the face. Regarding the question of primary authorship, Danilo then explains that he thinks the patches have been changed extensively by him, thus warranting the primary authorship, and he also points out that keeping Lena as primary author on patches heavily reworked by him would have meant misrepresenting her work instead, which is potentially an issue. Let's say that the code ends up not working, you wouldn't want Lena to get blamed for something that Danilo did. He also points out, again, that in Lena's emails she said that Danilo was free to take anything useful from my past patch submissions and use it or submit it in any way, and that he preferred not to bother her since she said that she didn't want to deal with kernel development anymore at all, to have a mental health break. Then Danilo again offers more explicitly, this time there's no room for misunderstandings, to set Lena as the primary author of some of the patches and asks Lena which patches she would like to see changed. Lena then replies to reiterate that she just assumed that primary authorship of their patches would be preserved out of kernel etiquette, and that, and I quote, I don't have the spoons to make some deep analysis here. You should know how much of the code you changed, added, or just moved around. I'm not going to litigate this further. If you think that splitting up a commit into multiple commits and moving the code around warrants taking over primary authorship of a project that I've been working on for a year now, so be it. I'm just disappointed. And then we're back at Danilo. He says, the broader context of the private email was about you stepping back on kernel development. You did so with a few more details that made it clear to me that you don't want to be bothered with kernel development anymore. In combination with you giving permission to use it or submit it in any way, I thought it's better to just pick a safe path, not to misrepresent you given all of the changes that I've made. He also makes the point that Lena underestimates the extent of the changes he has made to her original code. He provides a full diff that contains all of his changes and points out that Lena has both claimed that she doesn't have the spoons to make some deep analysis here, but also accuses Danilo of not having made enough changes to warrant taking over primary authorship. Two statements that are that seems somewhat contradicting. How do you know that if you don't have the time to check properly? He again says that he's ready to change primary authorship and points out that Lena hasn't yet asked to be set as primary author on any set of specific subset of patches, and instead spent time to stir up drama with some quite strong words. He says, "I neither have time nor am I willing to deal with some random drama like this. If you want something changed, just go ahead and tell me what, without more drama and without more accusing me of things." And this is where Lena completely breaks down. She says, "Alright, please then remove my authorship entirely from the series, including code developed by and sign-off lines. I hereby release my code as CC0, which means that you don't need the sign-offs, it's yours now. The same applies to future code submitted that I originally authored as part of the Asahi kernel Git 3. That way we don't need to argue about any of this. I thought that asking for patches that I mostly authored to keep my Git authorship would be an uncontroversial request and not unreasonable to ask you to figure out which those are, since you made the changes slips and patch number 3 is clearly one, but apparently even that gets you flamed on the Linux thread these days. I regret having been a part of this community." Thus, the root of the conflict so far is that Lena and Danilo disagree on the extent of the changes made by him. He is still willing to change primary authorship of the patches, but since he believes that he significantly changed all of them, he is asking Lena which one to author to her. Lena wants Danilo to figure it out by himself, even though the whole point is that Danilo thinks he's made significant changes to all of the patches and thus can't just figure it out himself. The solution by Lena is just to throw the table over, release everything as Creative Commons, even though Danilo was pretty professional and willing to collaborate throughout. Here, another developer, Dave Early, pitches in, trying to convey the absurdity of the behavior of Lena. He says, "The project will maintain authorship sign-offs of any patches that are clearly still authored by you. We will err on the side of caution, and on rewritten patches which share some decent amount of history shall retain your authorship." In this case, it does appear that instead of putting the 5 minutes to look into Danilo's reasoning and supplied diff, and either saying, "My bad, this is sufficiently new code and I don't feel like I wrote it," or "I'd still prefer to retain authorship despite your changes," both of which Danilo indicated would be respected, you somehow picked door number 3, which probably took more time and effort than either of the above options. Again, no need to pick door number 3 here, you can't let this pass go below 50, it won't explode. At this point of time, people started to notice about this entire discussion, the fact that one of the previously lead developers of a major project in the Linux world was releasing all of her code as Creative Commons was somehow newsworthy, and as such people started talking about it. A thread was created regarding it in the Linux subreddit with people reading the entire discussion and mostly siding with Danilo, understandably so in my opinion. This further frustrated Lena, who at this point felt compelled to go through the patches to understand whether she should have been primary author or not. She did so in a very mathematical way, arguing that she wrote around 70% of the code, and she thought that Danilo's changes were minor. Which is fair, however, she then adds, "And I'm sure Danilo knows this, having done the refactoring, rearranging, modification work to get here." Through this sentence, Lena is de facto claiming Danilo to be lying, since Danilo instead said that he thinks he has made significant changes. She then went back to the mailing list to post the following message. "I wanted to keep this private, but apparently it is impossible for me to send 2 emails in a reply to the Linux kernel thread without it ending up all over the news and the entire world speculating about why am I so upset. I would be a lot more willing to work with the kernel community if I hadn't been traumatized by a major Linux kernel maintainer having privately admitted to siding with an abuser and harasser who has attacked me relentlessly for over 1 year now, mocking me for it, using their arguments and wording against me, lying to their peers to cover up actions and collusion against me, and more. Now, please let me leave this community in peace. You all figure out what to do with my code, and whether you care about proper attribution, I just want out. At this point in time, I think it's clear that Lena is in too much distress to handle this discussion. She has misinterpreted the initial offer by Danilo, and then shown that she assumes Danilo to be lying instead of acting in good faith, and now she's explaining that her frustration in this discussion is also caused by prior bad behavior by other Linux kernel maintainers, all of which makes it pretty impossible to resolve the central conflict of the discussion, which is, again, the disagreement over the significance of Danilo's changes. And again, Lena wants Danilo to understand by himself which patches to author to Lena, but Danilo won't be able to do that because he thinks he has made significant contribution to all of the patches. Lena then comes back to the thread, also explaining that she believes to have written 75% of the code of the patches, and asks Danilo to put her as the primary author of patches from 3 to 7. Note here that she says that she has been forced to do this analysis, which I don't believe to be completely true. Danilo then decides to point out that code authorship is not about who authored the largest percentage of code lines, and he decides to list all of the changes that he has made to the original patches by Lena, pointing out that they are not minor reworks. Then he says that he's fine with changing ownership of the patches 3 through 7, but points out that it would include one patch that has been mostly refactored by him, almost completely authored by him from scratch, and thus it wouldn't really make sense to ask to change the authorship of that one. And at this point he's also clearly frustrated with Lena's assumptions of bad faith of him, and he says that, and I quote, "First of all, you keep talking as if I would have been resisting to do any changes, even though I offered you to change things from the get-go. Instead of taking the offer, you decided to go with wild accusations, without even properly looking at things and understanding my intentions. The decision I took is clearly reasonable, and nothing about it is uncommon. However, I understand that you prefer to have primary authorship, even if the code has been reorganized in new commits, moved, modified, or rewritten. This really is totally fine for me, and I won't argue about it, even though one could." I think he's right, really. When assuming good faith from him, it has been completely reasonable, and he has been completely reasonable throughout and very available to fix things. The issue is that apparently due to previous bad experiences, Lena is assuming bad faith instead. She said it herself, and is not willing to collaborate. This results in drama and discussion, which makes Lena even more frustrated, and in her next emails she says that, though given the mess this turned into, as soon as this conversation is over, I will be sending all kernel-related emails directly into Sieve Discard. While a simple question would have been fine and encouraged, this mess is not, and I do not have the time or mental health cycles to deal with any more of this going forward. So indeed, if you ever find yourself questioning something about my code going forward, please take your best guess, because now I'm really done with kernel involvement completely. And later, see, you could have started with that story about the DRM device being more major change than others, and spared us all with a blind arguing and wasting our time. The discussion goes on, but it does some circles, and I think I can spare it. I can spare it to you. At this point, you probably understand the main point of these agreements and arguments on both sides. I have a few things to say myself. Firstly, should I have not made this video? Again, the previous developer of a significant project in Linux space breaks down in the Linux kernel mailing list and tries to make all of our code CC0. A Reddit thread about this is trending, and even Brody did a video about this a few hours ago. You should go watch it, by the way. It goes more into detail in the discussion. is all of this unwarranted? So on one side, I think not. If you stir up drama in a public place and you are a content creator and a significant contributor of a well-known project, you should expect people to be interested in your actions and report about what you do. I think it's unfair to expect everyone to avoid the topic altogether, even though all the information is publicly available and people are interested in it. Brody also points out, and I had not thought of that Lena could have also tried to resolve this privately with Danilo by sending him only an email. By replying publicly, you're accepting that eyes will be on your emails. This is particularly important given that, again, Lena is a content creator, which I'm sorry to say means that you have more responsibility in public than other people. On the other side, there's an interesting point to be made in open source versus closed source development. Not every good developer might have the social skills to handle attention and write the threads about them. However, in open source development, this has to happen publicly, whereas Windows kernel developers don't have to be held accountable in the same manner. This might insert some extra burden on open source developers that they don't necessarily want or need, making software development a bit harder for us. However, I don't think the solution to this can be, people should just close your eyes and pretend not to see this. That won't work. Finally, another important point this raises is how we should handle developers who are not in the mental space to be contributors and participate in development discussions. I believe that, given Lena's current situation, there was no way to resolve this without stirring up drama and at the same time also being respectful to Danilo, though I might be wrong. So if we want to preserve the mental health of our contributors, how do we react when we see someone who is already burnt out and they're making things worse for themselves? I would like to see big projects like Linux organized with people who are experts in mental health and that can jump in when conflicts happens to help everybody involved. The status quo is letting those arguments play out in public and without guardrails, which I don't think is working out. Also, wow, everything about this was very hard to pronounce. But it's over. The video is done. I can go back to sleep. I wish.